My family always put my sister and her kids first, leaving me in the shadows. This time, I secretly left to take back my freedom and happiness. Hey Reddit. I've always been the quiet one in my family. The one who just went along with whatever everyone else wanted, never really making waves. But there comes a point when you realize that your whole existence has been spent pleasing others, and for what? I grew up watching my sister get all the attention, all the praise, and all the love, while I was left in the background, barely noticed. It wasn't always this way, of course. We used to be close, once upon a time. But then, everything changed. My sister had always been the golden child. Growing up, she was the one who excelled at everything. She was the one who got straight A's, who was always the teacher's pet, who had the charm that everyone gravitated toward. I, on the other hand, was more of the introverted type. I didn't have that natural charisma, and I wasn't as academically gifted. But what I lacked in those areas, I made up for in hard work. I was always the one helping others, quietly taking care of things in the background. But no matter how much I did, I was never the one who received any acknowledgement. When my sister got married, it seemed like the entire world shifted to revolve around her. Her wedding was the talk of the family for months before and after. It was as if nothing else mattered. I remember standing there, watching as she became the center of attention, and feeling like I didn't even exist. The attention I had gotten before was suddenly shifted to her, and I was left to silently accept it. Then came the kids. The moment she had her first child, everything changed even more. My parents, who had already been overly invested in her life, now had a new obsession: their grandchildren. I could never get a word in edgewise. Every family gathering revolved around her kids. Their milestones, their activities, their needs, they were all anyone could talk about. Meanwhile, I was still trying to figure out how to make something of my own life. I never complained, though. I didn't want to seem petty. I didn't want to rock the boat. But inside, I felt like I was suffocating. I had become invisible, a shadow in the background of my own family. I watched as my sister's life flourished while mine seemed to wither away. Every conversation revolved around her and her kids, and no one seemed to notice that I was slowly fading. There were times I tried to bring up my own life, my own struggles, but it was always met with indifference or, worse, with distractions. I couldn't get anyone to listen to me. I tried to share my accomplishments, but they were always brushed aside in favor of another story about my sister's kids. The frustration grew over time, but I kept pushing it down. After all, it wasn't their fault. It was just the way things were. I told myself that maybe I was being selfish. Maybe I should just accept it. After all, what was the point of complaining? They were family, right? They were supposed to be there for each other, even if they didn't always understand each other. But as the years went on, I began to realize that this wasn't just some passing phase. This was my life, and I was being left behind. And no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the feeling of being forgotten. It wasn't until last year that I finally snapped. My sister called to invite me over for a family dinner. As usual, the moment I stepped into the house, the focus immediately shifted to her kids. They were running around, making a mess, and my parents were doting on them, completely ignoring me. I smiled and greeted everyone, but I could feel the familiar sting in my chest. No one even asked how I was doing, what I was up to, or if I needed anything. It was as if I didn't exist. I tried to join in the conversation, but my attempts were quickly drowned out by talk of potty training and school projects. I could feel the resentment building up inside me. It was all too much. I wanted to scream, to say something, but I couldn't. I had spent so many years silently accepting this treatment that it felt impossible to change it now. But that night, something inside me broke. I realized that I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep letting my family take up all the space in my life without ever giving me any. That's when I made the decision. I was done. I was done being the invisible one, the one who always played second fiddle. I was done being the silent observer in my own life. I was going to reclaim my happiness, my freedom, and my identity. It wasn't going to be easy, and it wasn't going to be pretty, but I had to do it for myself. The first step was simple: I decided to leave. Not for a weekend getaway or a short vacation, but for good. I couldn't stand the thought of living my life in the same cycle of neglect and indifference any longer. So, I packed my bags, booked a one-way ticket, and silently slipped out of the house while no one was looking. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. I didn't even leave a note. I just left. I spent the first few days in a state of shock. It felt like I was living in some kind of dream. For the first time in years, I wasn't consumed by my family's drama. For the first time, I was free to make my own decisions, to choose my own path. I rented a small apartment in a city I'd always dreamed of living in. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And it felt like the world had suddenly opened up before me. I started focusing on myself for the first time in forever. I got a new job, something I was passionate about. I made new friends, ones who didn't know about my past, who didn't have any preconceived notions about who I was. I started doing things that made me happy, things I had always put off because I was too busy trying to please others. But even as I started to build my own life, the guilt crept in. I felt like I had abandoned my family, and for a while, it ate at me. I wondered if they missed me, if they even noticed I was gone. But I quickly realized something: I didn't owe them an explanation. I didn't owe them my life. I had spent so many years living in their shadow, and now it was time for me to step into the light. A few weeks passed, and my family started to reach out. My sister called first, asking why I hadn't been answering her texts or calls. She sounded concerned, but there was also a hint of frustration in her voice. I didn't answer. I didn't want to go back to that old life. I didn't want to explain myself to anyone who had never cared enough to ask before. Then came my parents. They were more persistent. They sent me messages asking if I was okay, if I was safe. I could feel their worry through the text, but I didn't give in. I had to do this for me, even if it meant hurting them. And slowly, I realized that I was finally beginning to feel something I hadn't felt in years: peace. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't without consequences. My family tried to guilt trip me, tried to make me feel bad for leaving. But deep down, I knew I had made the right choice. For the first time in my life, I was living for myself. And that made everything worth it. Sometimes, the hardest journey is the one we take to rediscover ourselves, when we stop living for others and finally choose to live for our own happiness and freedom. That's all for today's video, folks. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us next time for more exciting content. See you next time.